Alright, it's time for that moment when Nintendo Switch 2 release date speculation. Yeah, so I've talked about this a number of times and even briefly earlier today. However, I wanted to discuss it a little more in depth for why exactly people have been talking about this date. Um, because even though I will be probably talking about this more, particularly later in the week when we do our quintessential weeks from the Switch 2 Direct uh, episode, which again we have so few left. We'll probably do ones since the Direct, kind of in the way we did or have been doing for the since the Switch 2 reveal, and maybe we'll continue it for that. Probably not. Maybe. I feel like that's going to be such a more substantial. Again, we're seeing so much more of the Switch in that than we will be. Like, we'll be seeing games, but like we'll be seeing probably like quadruple at least of the amount of time they showed, and it won't be as dragged out, most likely. Anyway, why do I have this image of the Super Nintendo World? So, as you may or may not know, the Universal Orlando Resort for Super Nintendo World was announced back in October to be opening in Orlando. So it's opening in Orlando on May 22nd, 2025. Obviously, this is a date that has been talked about a fair bit for being in speculation for being the release date of the Switch 2. Obviously, I have my own personal gripes and things with this date. Obviously, if I have to choose a date for the Switch 2 to come out, for my personal sanity, I want it to be mid-summer. I just straight up don't want it to release before. Like, I would love it to be a July release. Just that is my personal take. Obviously, I'm not in the same group as most people with that. Most people want it as soon as possible. However, I'm not currently really able to play many games, so I want it to come out later. But also, like, it's kind of hard because if you're releasing the console before people are out for summer, especially since such a big target demo is going to be the kids and the younger generation, it's a little awkward to be having it where you are releasing a console while people are still having to do things. Although people have talked about, it might even be Nintendo Forecast was like, oh, but what if you are, having kids talk about, what their summer plans are now. They're like, oh, I'm going to get that new Nintendo and I'm going to get that new Mario Kart, before school ends, and that incentivizes people, right? Because you're like spreading the word and it's like publicity and things. Which again, something like Super Nintendo World is a big proponent of that. So having it, earlier is big. Obviously, Nintendo is much bigger in Japan than in the States. But even then, it's still a big major release to be having that. Having that the same day as the launch is pretty crazy to me. I think it's plausible, but I don't know. Again, this is happening a week after, as we just talked about earlier today, the new Mario Kart with standard cart Lego set will be coming out. Can't believe that's an 18 plus Lego set. That's so funny. But anyway, I assume it's just because it's really complicated. Like a lot of those big complicated ones, I think must be. But I just am not used to seeing 18 plus on a Mario Lego. It just seems so ridiculous in my head. Anyway, it's cool that that is a thing, and I do wonder because again that's happening the week before, on the 15th of May, if that is, and again this is happening on the 22nd. Could that mean it's coming out in either of those weeks? I do wonder if, again, they're going for this sleek look that maybe they would do a fancy, funky Apple style trailer showing like the release date, like folding in with the like five twos flipping around, so it's not just like switch two and then the twos multiply and then they like flip around to make the 5 22 25 or something. I don't know. It's very plausible and it'd be very cool. I think from like a just a visual aesthetic perspective, that's just awesome. But again, it is really early in terms of reveal to release for the January Direct or presentation into the release of the original Switch was a comparable period of time. But I do think it might be a little longer. Again, the amount of time we've waited between, I guess maybe has been pretty similar, but it's still like, I don't know. I feel like it might be a bit longer. I feel like April into doing stuff again, even if it's early April into late May, and February was a tiny month, because it wasn't a leap year back in 2017, it still feels a little weird. It still feels a little weird to have that um, so soon. Again, maybe I'm reading too far into it because obviously using 2017 as too much of a blueprint is not the most functional thing. We know that it's not going to most likely be the same, but I don't know. I feel like I'm more apt to think that even early June is much more likely than May. Another reason people have been thinking May is that uh, it's very. I think there was some gap in the in person like switch to like not the dev kits but the like hands-on experiences, and that this would be happening maybe around one of their Germany ones. Nintendo has a lot of important kind of like headquarter areas and whatever in, I believe it's Germany, maybe Washington, and then in Japan, like in Kyoto. So in terms of those locations, it's much easier for them to do a console launch when they're also doing a hands-on there. So that way they're not having to like cart a bunch of resources over. They can like maintain it in the one city or the country or whatever. So I don't know that much. I know Nintendo Forecast has talked about it a lot. So to that end, I'm like, okay, it could be that they're planning that. I also know from, again, Kit and Krista and kind of understanding Nintendo from the inside, even though President Furukawa is obviously not the same as like former Nintendo presidents, I feel like it's very plausible that they will at least have the same notion of, oh, a lot of the company wasn't aware of the Switch 2, therefore they might not have known when they were going to launch the console, when they, like, even the higher ups, when they made that. Like, even from a manufacturing perspective, they might have still been locking down a date. And it might really be they're still locking down, or they've like been walking down the date. And therefore, that 5/22/25, while very cool, who knows, right? If that's really what they're going to do. I think it's a very cool thing. And I do think it's kind of like the super switch of the, oh, it would be a cool callback, whatever, even though obviously, like, I think Switch 2 is just a better idea. And even then, like, it probably would have been too much like the new era of the 3DS, which was just such a weird thing, such a bad naming convention in the West. Anyway, it's still it's very interesting to me. So I can totally see the May date happening, but I simply don't believe it will. Not only because Nintendo likes to defy expectations, but because it honestly makes too much sense, and Nintendo doesn't do that. I guess that's defying expectations, but more of like it. There's a lot lining up for it, and I feel like that just means it won't. I feel like Nintendo will be like, all right, it is first week of June, or it's last week of June, or it's early July. Like I feel like there's a lot of things. Um, May also is around. There's like Golden Week, I believe, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff about that, which is like Japan, like gift giving and stuff. So I don't know. It's a very funky situation. Like, is it worth them releasing too far after a major spending spree time? Like, are people going to be willing to save, or does it really not matter because this is probably one of the most like requested and wanted consoles ever? Like, who knows? Like, again, the Switch was massive, and like obviously it didn't have the most sales because DS, I believe, and the PS2 had more, but like we're on PS5 and we've had the sequel to the DS. We've not had the sequel to the Switch. So this is like probably the most anticipated console. I would say definitely at the moment and probably of the last while. Still, I don't know. I think also just because like PS6 is not well wanted, Xbox no longer matters really, which is a little sad. But seriously, they have no real impact in terms of consoles anymore. They are a this is an Xbox. We can stream. Here's Game Pass. They really, really don't need the consoles. I love Xbox consoles visually. I actually quite like navigating them. I have a One S, and it's great, which this is the Switch 2 is supposed to be comparable to in kind of functionality. Or maybe even it'll be, I don't even know. It'll be comparable probably. So Anyway, um, yeah, I genuinely think that the March 22nd date is plausible. I think it's funny that it lines up with this, especially given that, again, this would be including the Donkey Kong area. And as we know, for the original Switch announcement, which was a shadow drop, Switch 2 announcement, which was a shadow drop, it happened when we saw this rare design DK, again from like company Rare, because whatever, or studio, um, for Donkey Kong Country Returns HD port released again on the 16th of January, the same day as that. Obviously, you could be like, oh, well, actually, it was 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m., and it took like 5 hours after. It's the same thing. It's functionally the same day. Like, I'm just thinking it's funny that you'd have Donkey Kong, right, that's getting pushed out for that port when the Switch 2 is announced, and it kind of got overshadowed by that. And then also having this happen with, again, this DK expansion area, which has Diddy in the background. Again, I still wonder how and if they're gonna really do redesigns or anything. Also, I like that the Luigi is very clearly just taken from, I think, Mario Kart 7 box art, which I don't like that I know what that is. But anyway, I think my assumption is going to be first week of June and May, if not. But the moment when, yeah, I don't know what episodes I'm going to make tomorrow.